Hi class. Okay, this is the second module. We've already talked a little bit about a bit of an introduction to business ethics, and I've tried to present you with the concept of the inclusive manager versus the exclusive manager, or the warrior versus the gladiator concept. So you understand that in ethical management, we are trying to develop our skills in the area of becoming warriors and inclusive of what I've been calling the partners in our business. So, just by way of a review, those partners are the employees, the customers, shareholders, and of course, to some extent, the environment or the materials that you're using to make the product that you're making. So with that introduction, we're kind of ready now to enter some of the basic skills that we're going to need in order to be able to work and to solve issues in business ethics. So first of all, let's just take a look at what's the problem-solving model. You have to understand that this model is first of all applicable to any aspect of a company, whether it's finance, marketing, production, or in this case, ethical management. So decision making needs to be and is a sequential process, which means that you apply different principles that you've been learning along the way to the solution and the successful resolution of the issue or the problem that you're dealing with. So therefore, we can say that being an ethical manager really becomes a process of reasoning. Let me give you an idea of what I mean. We've all heard of the idea of thinking outside the box. And everybody wants to be able to think outside the box. But nobody knows what it means. Usually when I ask that question in a live class, people will have a lot of trouble coming up with what a definition of thinking outside the box means. They know that it's a highly desirable quality. They know that it's a good thing. They just don't know what it is. And it's kind of difficult, therefore, to acquire the quality or the capability of thinking outside the box if you don't even know what the term means. So let me try to give you an introductory definition as to what that term means. In any situation that you will be confronted with in the business world, regardless of the discipline that you'll be applying, you're going to be confronted with a series of constraints that you understand limit your field of action. A constraint can be a budget. A constraint can be management directives. A constraint can be the business environment that you're in, the political environment. So you can see there are many different constraints in the problem, in any problem that you're confronted with. When we talk about thinking outside the box, we are therefore talking about thinking that is outside of those constraints. So if you imagine those constraints to be the walls of a room, essentially what you're doing is you're moving the walls further away, either on all four sides or on two of the sides. And you have to understand what are the parameters of the movement that I can make. So for example, if you have an issue of budget, so the traditional source of where the funding will come from to accomplish the goal that you may have may not be accessible to you. Perhaps there are other sources of funding that will be accessible to you. Now, I'm not talking necessarily about a bank loan, but perhaps you could be in a situation where you're trying to deal with a pollution issue and company doesn't have the money, but you can perhaps get the city that you're in to help fund the improvements that you do. So that's just an idea of how you can sort of move the boundaries around and try to accomplish the goals that you want. So when we talk about thinking outside the box, we are talking about moving the boundaries as they currently exist in a reasonable way, a little bigger and a little wider, so that you therefore end up essentially with a whole series of additional options. So that's the beginning of the idea of how you solve a problem. Now, there are essentially 5 sequential steps that you will need to understand in terms of solving a problem, and you'll be able to apply that to the midterm work that we're going to be doing, as well as the final case that you're going to be doing. The first thing you've got to be able to do is understand what is the issue. What's the problem here? Now that may seem like a very simple solution, or a very simple thing rather to accomplish. But let me give you a little story, which is a marketing story, but it highlights the importance of defining the problem. Coca-Cola had an issue with its competition with Pepsi. This goes back to the 1980s. The difficulty they had was that every taste test against Pepsi, Pepsi won and Coke lost. So they were feeling a tremendous amount of pressure. The conclusion of Coca-Cola management at that time was that it was a flavor problem, and that if they could alter the flavor of Coca-Cola, they would then be able to win all of the taste tests. And once that happened, that would again reassert their dominance in the soft drink market. And that's what they did. They went about redeveloping the formula, and they introduced a product called the New Coke, which was an immediate disaster and cost them about $300 million in the 1980s in lost revenue, and about 6 or 7 points in declining market share. So clearly, the problem as they saw it, which was one of taste, ended up to be something different. But since they hadn't defined the problem correctly, they ended up developing a solution that was also ineffective. And that's why at the beginning of the process, defining the problem is so critical. And so when we come to the field of ethics, it's similarly the same thing. When we're talking about the life of a person, for example, if that's what the challenge is, let's say it's a pollution issue, and instead we choose to call it whether we should pollute using this system or pollute using another system, we've kind of got the problem definition incorrect, and therefore no matter what we do to solve it, we're going to not end up resolving the ethical issue that's involved. The second thing to understand in problem solving is who the players are in the game. Who are the stakeholders, or the partners, as you may call them, that are involved in the game, and how are they affected? Not what are they doing, but how are they affected? So, for example, if one of the stakeholders in the problem is you, and there is possibly the chance that you may have to blow the whistle and reveal the unethical behavior to a wider audience, you are obviously going to be affected by the fact that you might lose your job. Similarly, if it's an issue with pollution, the people who are being exposed to the toxic gas or waste or whatever it is that you're polluting with, they can become sick. That's how they're affected. Not the fact that they live in the neighborhood, not the fact that they're doing or that they are polluting if it's the management. So you have to be able to ascertain not only who are the stakeholders, the key primary stakeholders, but also how they are affected. The third element in the development of the problem, now that we know the issue and we understand the stakeholders, is of course to um, isolate what the key facts are in this particular situation. So, who is doing what to whom, and what is the impact of that activity? And you may have 4 or 5 different facts that you have there. Now, what is really important is for you to be able to separate fact from opinion. Um, that is extremely critical in terms of making business decisions, because opinion, more times than not, reflects the emotional connection that you may have with a particular issue. For example, you may feel that it's unethical to raise the price of certain drugs beyond a certain level because you feel there will be people who don't have the ability to pay for the drugs at that higher cost level. And you're 100% correct. However, that's your opinion. That's your feeling. Another person can be sitting in the room and say, that's great, you don't want to raise the prices, but we're a corporation that has to produce profits. And we have to fund, let's say it's for a drug, so we have to fund the research in order to create these drugs. And we need the higher price in order to be able to accomplish the goal of keeping this organization ongoing. And you're pretty well shot out of the water right then and there. So it's very important that when you're looking at the facts, and we'll talk about this a little later in the next session, that you keep the facts to those things that are observable. And as I said, we'll talk about that a little bit later. Once we have established these 3 things, what are the facts, or what is the issue, sorry, who are the stakeholders, who's playing in the game, and how are they in the game, and what are the key subjective objective facts in the case. Now we're ready to do the last 2 functions. The 4th function is to determine what are my options. Now, when I'm thinking outside the box, if I've moved the walls a little bit, I now have the ability to see new options that I may not have seen before. So creating the options that will resolve the original issue that I spoke about. So if my issue, as I gave you the story with Coca-Cola, was the taste test, then they came up with the right solution. They decided to change the formula and affect the taste. So that matched the issue with the eventual resolution, and it was certainly one of the options they had. So coming up with the options are dependent on how you identified the original issue. Finally, once you have come up with a number of options, you're going to have to choose one of those options, and then you're going to have to present those options to some other group. It could be your peers. It could be a management group. It could be the bank if you need funding. It could be any number of places that you have to present that information. And so in order to present it, you have to solidify the option with ethical arguments. And you use the moral standards that are a part of the culture of your company in order to solidify those arguments. And again, we'll talk about the moral standards in my next video, but for now, whatever option you're going to choose, you will have to find amongst the small list of moral standards that I'm going to give you, moral standards that strongly support the option that you're choosing. Once we've done that, and we have our options, we have a strategy that we have chosen that we want to follow, we know the issues, we know the stakeholders, and we know what the facts are. Now we're ready to apply that moral reasoning process and put that whole package together, and we are going to talk about that in the next video.